Good morning again. This is very loud. If you don't mind, I'll just turn it down a bit. Is that a bit better?
Yeah.
Too soft now. That's all right, I'll project a bit more. I've already delivered my testimony in this church before, and when Kennedy asked me to deliver it today, we discussed that there are new people in the church who haven't heard it, so it would be appropriate for me to be up here again. If my records are correct, it's actually been 7 years, so it's been 7 years since I last delivered it, and I've expanded on a few things in greater detail, so hopefully those of you who have heard it before won't feel like you're watching a rerun on daytime TV. And I would like to point out a disclaimer here that while I do have a script in front of me, what you're getting from me today is not a performance. This is not a character that I'm portraying. This is a history of the events within my life, and I'm certainly not meaning to downplay what Rachel just did, portraying a character from a real character from history. What she does actually always gets me emotional, and so it might actually choke me up a bit, having come from that to giving this personal testimony. Before I get into the meaty bits, I would like to share with you a description of the day that I was baptised. You can check out the photos on Facebook if that is your thing. I got baptised in the chilly July ocean water at Deception Bay in 2005. Partly because I knew there were many of my friends who would not go into a church, but mostly because it was a public declaration. I was making a statement to the world. Now, about 10 minutes before I was due to start, some 30-odd corellas arrived and perched in the tree directly above where I was going to be speaking. And I thought, oh dear, someone's going to get pooped on. But that didn't happen to my knowledge. And when I began speaking, their noisy squawking stopped. It was almost as if they had come to listen to what was going to be said. Of course, after I spoke and then went down into the water, as I rose up out of the water, all the corellas took flight. And I really felt that it was a godly gift that I was blessed with that day. Also, I didn't feel the chill of the July ocean water. And as I was hugging people afterwards, they commented that I felt warm, not cold. Now, I'm not telling you this to boast about my personal relationship with God, but rather to confirm to you that the more you trust in Him and give up the reins to let Him lead you, the more He reveals His Spirit to you. Now, I wasn't raised a Christian. My parents are atheists, and while it can be disheartening watching people you love struggling as they walk without God, I'm still hopeful and prayerful that this will change. When I was a child, my grandmother would pray over me and my sister when she tucked us in at night. If I asked her a question that was too hard to explain to a child, like, if the Earth is spinning, why don't we all just get flung off into space? She would tell me that I didn't need to worry about it because God has these things sorted out. Probably she also didn't know the answer herself. So from an early age, I had this concept of God, that there was something bigger out there taking care of things. It wasn't until my early teen years that I started to ask the who is this God person anyway sort of questions. My neighbours at the time were at church every Sunday, so I started tagging along with them. If my memory serves correct, my main motivation was actually trying to foster a better relationship with their eldest daughter, who was and still is quite a looker. But while I failed to improve my relationship with her, thankfully I was successful in starting a relationship with God. I would have been 12 or 13 at this time when I first prayed what can be referred to as a crossing over prayer. God, I am a sinner. I believe that Jesus is your Son and died on the cross as payment for my sins. I ask that you forgive me of my sin and write my name in the book of the living, so that I may never die but receive eternal life. Many Christians speak of being filled with the Holy Spirit at this time, and I was lucky enough to experience that for myself. It was like a weight was literally lifted off of my shoulders, like I had been carrying around luggage my whole life without realising it. And suddenly, someone else was carrying it for me. It was overwhelming. I say it was overwhelming because the experience was so much more than the emotional rush you get from watching a movie. It was overwhelming in a way that was obvious. What was happening inside me, what was filling me up, was not something that came from within myself. It was something that was outside, coming into me. If you've done a course on baptism, you may remember the origins of the Greek word baptizo. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, baptizo, baptizo, I'm not Greek myself. The origins of that word, baptizo, that is when you submerge clothing into dye to the point that the dye overwhelms the garment. It changes the colour of the garment. That's what it's like when God's Spirit enters you. It overwhelms you to the point that you are changed. You are not the same as you were before, and you will never be the same again. But being a Christian and being a young teenager has its own unique set of issues. First of all, how am I to approach my atheist parents about what happened? How am I, as a 13-year-old, to instruct my parents that there's this whole other extraordinary part of life that they're missing out on? The school that I went to wasn't the sort of school where you could go around talking about how awesome God is without being ostracised. Even the children of the family who took me to that first church tended to shy away when I started getting zealous for God. So rather mistakenly, I learned not to talk about my faith. But if you stop talking about your relationship, your walk with God, it's not that much of a slide to start ignoring God. By the time I left high school, I was drinking, enjoying lewd jokes, accumulating adult movies, and even trying a few drugs when the situation presented themselves. It is a lot easier to mix with worldly people if you yourself behave like a worldly person. There were times during my drunken revelry that I had moments of clarity where I knew this was not where I was supposed to be. This is not what I'm supposed to be doing. No matter how far removed from my faith I became, there was one rule which I intended to keep because it made logical sense to me regardless of any godly direction, and that was to be monogamous. I was going to have one partner for life and that's it. A couple of weeks shy of my 21st birthday, I met the right girl who had the right amphetamines, and that plan went out the window. Following that, the line I had drawn for myself in maintaining my integrity as a man was forgotten. I broke hearts, I had mine broken, and so a new line was drawn. No physical intimacy without emotional love. So I'm just going to... But see, even this way of thinking, even this idea, it is a trap. God does not ask us to wait until we are married to stop us from having fun. The rules that God lays out for us is to save us from ourselves, to stop us from hurting ourselves, to stop us from hurting others, and hurting our relationship with Him. The act of physical intimacy fills our brains with a flood of happy, joy chemicals. And in a sense, this can create an addiction to a person. If that relationship ends, the withdrawal symptoms can be likened to coming down off a drug addiction. When I was 24, I was pretty much living with a girl for the good part of a year. It was the sort of relationship that everyone expected would go the distance. On Valentine's Day, I had set up a surprise for her that made her so happy that she cried. I realised I had to get serious. I had to make a decision. I had to either marry this girl or let her go so that she could get on with her life. In all the time that we had been together, I had not once spoken with God. But I did now. I asked for direction, for confirmation that this love is real. I said at the start that I was raised by atheist parents. Well, I was also raised by 1980s romantic comedy movies. Love should have fireworks and a musical backing track to tell us what emotions to follow and which ones to ignore. My concept of love was not in any way biblical. When I prayed to God for direction, for revelation, the first thing that came into my head was my consumption of adult material. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it? I didn't understand this at the time, but in retrospect, I believe that God was trying to point out an issue that I needed to deal with to be a suitable husband. But that's not the thinking that I had at the time. There are other voices which speak to us, other voices which seek to pull us down and destroy us. Now, in my case, I'm not talking about literal voices in my head or whispers in my ear. I'm talking figuratively about the thoughts that enter our minds. The thoughts that won out on that day was the voice that said, this adult material you consume is proof that you don't love her. If you did love her, you wouldn't have this stuff to begin with. She's too good for you. You need a lower class of girl to be truly compatible. And besides, you can't settle down yet. Your adult adventures haven't been broad enough. You're still young, plenty of time to find another after you've lived a bit more. So I left her the very day after Valentine's. Within a 24-hour period, I had taken this girl from the heights of a joyful satisfaction in life to the despair of an uncertain future. I committed murder that day. I don't say that lightly. I destroyed a woman's spirit. And I dragged it out as well. My mind and my heart was a mess of conflicts and confusions which I also subjected onto this girl as I tried to figure out my own state of mind and motivations. When her tolerance of my own broken state justifiably ended, I continued to withdraw into myself. I still went out and did the usual things that people do, but my life and the world I was living in didn't have the same flavour as before. I spent years hoping and praying that the relationship would be mended. I knew in my head that there was no chance of that, but my heart desired it. My mind and my heart continued to be confused, and often I would wake up at night not knowing where I was. After I get my bearings and realise, yes, I'm in my bed, this is where I live. I would wonder to myself, is this what it feels like to slowly be going mad? Then came the day when I heard through the grapevine that she had gotten married. The very first thought in my head was, how can I still be breathing? I was expecting that news would cause me to just drop dead on the spot. Didn't understand how it was that I could still be alive. But being alive and living are two different things. I sank into a depression where I lost track of time. I didn't know if it was weeks or months that were passing. I was self-medicating with Valium to get myself through the working day. I was drinking myself to sleep at night. And on the weekends I was throwing marijuana into the mix, trying to keep myself on an even keel, trying to keep myself at a functioning level. How long could I go on like that? Until my liver or my kidneys gave out. What purpose did my life have? What was keeping me here? My job? A monkey could do my job. Some monkeys could probably do it better. If I removed myself from the equation, someone else would have to fill my job, and that would be one less person in an unemployment queue. I'd be doing the world a favour by removing myself from it. You see, when you have depression, logical arguments cannot lift you up out of that, but flawed logic can definitely dig you deeper into it. I never understood suicide before then. I never understood how someone could reach a point where taking their own life seemed like the only solution. The false evolutionary logic that I had rationalised back in primary school was that suicide was Mother Nature's way of weeding out those who could handle the stress of modern day society from those who can't. Natural selection of a bad gene combination. That's what evolution teaches. Sorry, I don't want to get sidetracked on that. I could go a whole other topic there. I didn't believe my genes were at fault here, but emotionally, mentally, I was there. I chose a location and a method. No note was necessary because the location was the message. I was lying on the floor, bawling my eyes out, and I literally called out, "God help me, I've fallen and I can't get up." Now, once I called out these words, what happened next was otherworldly. It felt like someone stuck their hand inside my chest, grabbed my heart and turned it around. Now, if this would have happened literally, if Chuck Norris or Bruce Lee punched their fist through your chest, it would not be pleasant at all. But this spiritual hand was like someone turning the faucet on a tap. And all my negative emotions, I felt literally flowing. I literally felt them flow out of me. The thoughts inside my head were being rearranged. The same way that you defragment the hard drive on your computer, things were being put into place so that they made sense. God showed me how my mistakes had put me into positions and situations that in turn had helped other people and ultimately has brought me back into a right recognition and relationship with Him. Since that night, some 14-ish years ago, I have never been depressed again. I still get sad, don't get me wrong, watching an emotional movie, when someone passes away, especially if they weren't walking with God. I still get sad when I observe the brokenness of the world and of the people within it, or when I reflect on the fact that I am not married. But it is not a debilitating sadness. It is not an all-encompassing sadness where the joy you portray is just an act for the benefit of others. I get real enjoyment from the simplest of things. I can keep myself entertained just sitting and watching traffic, letting the world go by. Even watching grass grow can bring me joy because I'm observing some of the wonder of God's amazing creation. And maybe it's a good thing I'm not married, because if I were, I'm pretty certain she'd have something to say about me sitting around watching the grass grow. When I share my history with others, some say, "Oh, that's just mind over matter." But my mind was unhinged. How can something which is broken fix itself? It requires outside intervention. Some people would like to believe that I was mad in the head and still am mad, but that was the case, madness would reveal itself in other areas of my life. And it should be obvious to you all before I tell my story. Some people say, oh, that's well and good for you, but I need proof. Well, I am your proof. If God did not intervene in my life, I would not be standing here in front of you today. Thank you, God. And thank you for listening to my story.